Hi, I'm Iwan Fox and welcome to the latest episode of the 4Barsrest podcast, where I'm joined by my colleague Chris Thomas to chat about what has been going on, what is going on, and what is likely to go on in the future in the brass banding movement. We're offering our views and opinions on events, topics, new releases, and just about anything else that comes to mind. On this episode, we look back at the recent series of area championships, where there's plenty to discuss because there was a lot going on there. And we also chat about the recent National Youth Brass Band Championships, which really did make a mark up in Hull. Also, of course, because we are a review programme, we'll be discussing the latest CD releases and concerts, as well as giving recommendations on new and old books and LPs to add to your collection. So, Chris, without further ado, great to have you back with us. We've been having great feedback about everything that we've been doing, so we've got plenty to discuss.
We have indeed. It's been a busy few weeks, hasn't it?
It has. Well, we may as well jump straight into the retrospective. We look back at the regional championships. And once again, of course, it has strengths and weaknesses, but of course it's got passion and intrigue, it's got excellence, and it's got the oddities, from joyful celebrations, I think, to the best one was a Kit Kat eating percussionist up in Yorkshire. And of course, there's plenty of little things for the conspiracy theorists to look at as well. It remains the barometer, though, really, of the health of the banding nation. So are we in good health or mediocre health, or we in need to see a doctor?
I don't think we necessarily need to see a doctor, but everything changes, Ewan, and I think we've been through difficult times in many ways with banding and many other things over the last few years. And I do think we're reaching a point where the overall structure and the way that the regional championships are bolted together, if you like, needs looking at. We can't just continue with our heads buried in the sand without even entering into dialogue and discussion. And I think we're approaching a point where there's a need for serious dialogue, an honest conversation about ways in which things can be improved. That's what we're looking for. It's a way of improving and making it fit for purpose in 2025.
Well, talking about fit for purpose, I think it's good sometimes when you talk about a barometer, look at the stats of things and it gives you a real general impression. And then what we have to do is link that to the music that was actually played. There were 479 performances this year. One of them is still under appeal, and we wish them well with regards to that, to the Darwin Band, up 3 from 2024. Now, that sounds absolutely fantastic, although bear in mind where we were 20 years ago and where we are now. But there were 86 in the top section, 100 in the first section, but only 99 in the third and 88 in the fourth. So there was only one more third or fourth section performance as there were in the championship and the first section. So I think that tells you anything, is that the structure itself is really in desperate need of an overhaul.
Yeah, I mean, there were worries there, Ewan, as well. I mean, I'd go to Wales, your region, first of all. I think 3 bands played in the fourth section in Wales, which is very worrying. I mean, deeply worrying that there are so few bands. I mean, it's reaching a point where you can hardly hold a contest when there are that few bands involved. And I think it's the breadth of quality that we heard in all of the sections, but for me, particularly in the championship in the first section, I think the first section piece actually caught a lot of bands out, and there was a huge range from the better bands in the first section to the lesser bands that were trailing a long way behind in some cases.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck home to me is that strangely, when you look at some of the pieces that were played, if you go from Land's End all the way up to the Great Orme in top of North Wales, and then all the way across the Stonehenge and then back across, if you do one of these, I think, is it isosceles triangle, I think it is, if I remember my geometry well, there are just 13 fourth section bands competing in that huge area. Now, that's can't be right in any way, shape or form. And until we get that part of it right, whatever music is actually chosen, etc., we're still going to get that fundamental structural weakness, which will finally destroy the foundations on what the banding movement in the UK is all about.
I think that's true, but I also think that we have to be careful to bear in mind that you know, a lot of these problems, or some of these problems certainly, aren't just to do with the regional championships. They're a wider, deeper-seated problem in banding generally. And we shouldn't just be looking at the regional championships in isolation in these cases. We should be looking at the bigger picture, understanding why we have this problem, particularly in the lower sections. It's deeply concerning for the future, deeply concerning. And this is where the dialogue needs to take place. Yes, that there are possibilities, there are opportunities, I think, to restructure the regional championships, as you say. But if I'm honest, it's the bigger picture that concerns me more than that.
It's interesting that you say that, because there's the tinkering, I would say, a little bit like governments when they say we're going to save £5 billion here and £2 billion there, and you find out they're actually spending close to £1 trillion when it comes. So you're actually tinkering around the edges. There were things that were done this year which did help. There was the changes in the rules with regards to qualification to the finals itself. Well, that slightly changed things. Some of it came possibly back to bite a couple of bands in many ways. But also there was the borrowing rule, which saw bands in the third and fourth section able to borrow players to help them come to the competitions. And the good news from that, I think, was that it really wasn't abused. The third and fourth section bands used it in a constructive way to make sure that they came to the competition. If that has been done, as we've known, in the championship section, in the first section,
we'd have had chaos on our hands. Oh,
yes, we have better lawyers in there when they look at the blueprint to try and get away, wheedle their way through it. But that part. So those things are happening. So there is that little bit of movement there. And I have to say, Capital also turned around and said that the power is with the bands. And if the bands want change, they can vote for it. Almost democratically, really. So if they put themselves forward and say, we've got an idea, take it to the area annual general meetings of the regional committees, they can put forward these ideas that may be able to have that structural change. So there is, I agree with you, there's a bit of hope there.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, we've got to hand it to Capital. This is not an easy job. You know, this is a difficult task. And I think that's a big step in the right direction. I think taking those opinions, having a forum, having a platform for those opinions to be expressed, it's got to be a good thing, and it's got to be positive for the way forward. Of course, the bands themselves, you would hope, would agree with some of these differing opinions and thoughts, which is another matter again, isn't it? But I think the fact that Capital are open to that, and that these discussions are hopefully taking place, absolutely. I think they're doing their very best to try and move things forward as best as they can.
And we're talking also, of course, of having defined levels of excellence. It's not exclusion. When people talk about things are going to be restructured, that means the bands at the very top not really care with the bands at the very bottom. It isn't a little bit like the Premiership in football, that, you know, all the money goes to the top. We've got to try and support everything. And there's nothing wrong with being an excellent first section band, second section band, third section band, and fourth section band. It doesn't have to mean automatically that you just race up through the sections because the anomalies of the promotion and relegation system. There needs to have that really much more mature look at the way in which banding is structured. And one of the reasons I say that is that at the very top level, it's nice for bands to win and they celebrate the winning their titles. But Foden's now have won the Northwest Regional title 9 times in a row. Black Dyke, 8 out of the last 9. Tredegar and Corey have won every Welsh area championship except one since the year 2000. Whitburn and Co-op every year since 2008. Gus and Desford every year except one since 2008. And even in the north, NAS UWT Riverside, 6 times in the last 8 years. That's great for supporters of those bands, but it doesn't really make for healthy competition.
Well, I don't think you mentioned London there, and London's interesting because there have been differing champions in London. But in saying that, I look back on London and think it wasn't that long ago that London and the southern counties were not monopolised by Redbridge and Aveley and Newham, if you remember. Where they those two bands won every year. And then Friary Guildford came along and one or two other bands, Zone 1. So there has been change in London, but you know that shows that it can happen. I also think, however, that if you look back historically at the results of the regional championships, and I'm going back over decades and decades, there have always been periods where certain bands have dominated certain regions, and you know, so I don't think that's anything new. Are the strong bands getting even stronger? Yes, I think there probably is an element of that. Is that good for competition in the championship section? No, I don't think it is. But equally, I don't think we can get too hung up about it. I think we have to focus on the quality, and and if they're the bands that are winning by bringing quality, well, fair enough.
I think one part of that, though, there is a balance to have. That what we actually want is we want competition, but we don't want process. So it's not just a question of making sure that the same bands get through all the time. There's got to be an element of almost, as you say, a bit of intrigue about it, and people go along to find out which, not the same two bands are going to win all the time. There's 3 and 4 or 5, whatever. And that relates to each section also. That's part and parcel of what we're looking at there. One of the things that we, in regards to that then, was the music. And without going back over the pieces, the Capital Music Panel did a really good job with the choices for the regional championships this year. Talking to people like Malcolm Wood, who listened to 194 performances, above and beyond the Call of Duty, Malcolm, as always. And he was saying, the bands appreciated, even though beforehand there were some complaints and queries, but afterwards they really appreciated the choices of music that were made, both from the championship section with Diversions all the way down to the wonderful piece by Andrea Price, I Daedalus, in the 4th section. So the music did its job.
It did do its job, and I think probably the first section piece, Introduction, Elegy and Caprice, was the piece that perhaps was the more or the most controversial amongst the bands. But I have to say, in the top 2 sections, in the championship section where we had Diversions, and in the first section where we had the Morley Calvert piece, both of those works were taking bands into what I think was quite uncomfortable musical territory for some of them. They really struggled with 2 pieces that call for subtlety, nuance, a lot of musicality, a lot of thought to the structure of the music, which of course needs to come from the MDs. There were bands, I think, that really, really struggled with that, and that, I think, showed throughout the championship section and the first section contests. In the other sections, I mean, I have to say, the 4th section piece, Andrea Price's piece, I Daedalus, I thought that was a terrific piece of writing for the 4th section. Reminded me a little bit, not musically or melodically, but reminded me a little bit of Chris Bond's Neverland that we had a few years ago in the 4th section, simply because it was so well written for 4th section bands. It tested every element of them, tuning, technique, etc., interpretation, and it did it extremely well, but it did it in a format whereby the players thoroughly enjoyed the music. And I spoke to quite a few of the 4th section players in the Midlands, and they were all unanimous that they thoroughly enjoyed playing Andrea Price's music. So hopefully we're going to be hearing a little bit more of Andrea Price in the future. But again, also Oliver Westby's piece, Jacob van der Haan, yes. I think you said Jacob van der Roos then. We had a common cross of 2 composers. Jacob de Haan's Arkansas. Yeehaw, great fun, but the bands had a terrific time playing it, and you can't knock that. I think that the choices for all of the regions this year were spot on. They were really good choices, informed choices. So coming back to your original question, the pieces did do their job. There's no doubt about that.
Well, the good news as well, I think Andrea Price has now become a member of the Capital Music Panel.
She has.
Without promoting her own works, hopefully there'll be more coming from her. We've listened to some works of hers at different levels. Black Dyke did a piece of hers at the Royal Northern College of Music International Brass Band Festival. Really clever. Small piece, about 6.5, 7 minutes long. Whether or not that could be expanded, but that was really interesting. She really knows how to score for brass bands, but making sure that there's always interest and there's rigour to it. There's academic rigour to it. So it's not just 20 seconds of goldfish music, as we say, where they chuck in yet another one and yet another one. So there was something really about it. So that's great stuff there. A couple of highlights then from the championships, and I was going to say one of them talking about the conductors, as you say, those who have a clue and those possibly have less of a clue. One conductor who certainly had a clue was Professor Nicholas Childs, his 45th top section victory this year. An amazing record. He is now, I think he's about 15 ahead of his nearest challengers. Incredible record. And I just to say, he has won 20 of his last 25 regional contests. and the other ones he had 4 seconds in the 6th place when he was already pre-qualified. So if anybody out there wants to get your band through to the Royal Albert Hall, give him a ring and see if he's available, because I think that's about a guarantee to get you through to the Albert Hall.
It's astonishing. I can't imagine that record ever being equalled or bettered. I mean, he's just so far ahead of the field. I mean, 15 ahead of his nearest rival. I mean, they're astonishing statistics. And congratulations to Nicholas Charles, because that is a very, very special achievement indeed.
I could tell how long ago he was doing it. His first one came with when I was playing with Tredegar. So there we are. So that
was a long time ago. A long time ago, Ewan.
A real arc of span of history there of Bandit. On the flip side of that, it was wonderful to see the first top section victory, Jane Morrell with East London Brass. You talked about the London and Southern counties. There is interesting competition down there at times, but she is only the second female conductor to win a top section area prize, and the first one was the great Barbara Stone with Hanwell, also in the London area. So that's really good to see, also.
It's a great milestone, but it's also a sad milestone, isn't it? And a sad reflection on the fact that why, in this day and age, in 2025, why is that only the second time that has happened? So it's a wonderful thing, and real congratulations to the band. It's always great to see a band winning a regional championship for the first time, so congratulations to them.
Well, congratulations really to all the winners who are going through to the Joys of Cheltenham in September, and of course to the Royal Albert Hall in October. I have to say, with regards, back again with Andrea Price, she really is the flavour of the month here as well. She gave one of the best adjudication analysis that I've heard at the area championships this year. I don't know whether or not there's a policy that has gone through from the Association of Brass Band Adjudicators. At times, it tends to sound a little bit like a school sports day with everybody's a winner and everybody has played well and well done, and give yourselves a round of applause. I'm hoping that's just a passing phase, that we really do get back to a little bit more of critical analysis. Supportive and constructive, of course, but it needs to be critical. The last thing you want is to be told how brilliant you are and then be placed 15th. So there needs to be a reality with that. But people like Andrea Price and others really show that when you explain about the structure of the work and why bands have come where they are, it is appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, I listened to quite a few different adjudicators giving their summaries this year, and there was a huge range. In fact, there was a range almost as wide in the adjudicator summaries as there was in the quality of the performances at times, quite honestly. I genuinely don't think that any bands, and particularly lower section bands, simply want to hear an adjudicator get on the stage and say, well done, congratulate yourselves. As you said, Ewan, they want constructive, useful advice, informative advice that they can take away with them, learn from, and put into practice when they're next in the band room. So I don't know whether that's something that ABBA work on with adjudicators. It certainly should be, and I think it's something that they need to pay attention to going forward. But I totally agree that Andrea Price, who's a rising star on all fronts, really, isn't she, as you say, but her summaries were excellent, and they did exactly what they should do. They gave the bands constructive advice to take away.
Yeah, that's great stuff there. And one final one, I'm going to give out a round of applause. Now that we're going to be taking that, say the Pot and Kettle Black, we're doing this. And the round of applause goes to the organisers, the volunteers, indefatigable all volunteers, and the contest controllers who do a wonderful job there. And it's good to note this year there were no real reports of bad behaviour. And, you know, people turning around and saying, that brass bands are not welcome back at venues. So that's also been good news. So plenty to look forward to. That's what's happened to get the qualifiers. And now we got the national finals to look forward to in Cheltenham and the Royal Albert Hall. And of course, we talked about the music, and the music has been chosen for those events. And they're to do with anniversaries, Edward Gregson and Sir Arthur Bliss. Now, we both know about Edward Gregson. We both played his music, and we both played some of Arthur Bliss's music. So again, interesting choices, and especially the source material with the Bliss in particular. So there's some real good choices here, starting with Eddie Gregson's Symphony in 2 Movements at the Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah, well, I am absolutely delighted that the Symphony in Two Movements has been chosen. It is, I think, probably Eddie's finest piece. I think Eddie feels it's his finest piece, that it's one of his, well, it is his magnum opus, I think he feels, not just amongst his music for brass band, but amongst his entire output. It's a wonderfully rigorous academic piece, gritty at times, incredibly well structured. Gregson, without a shadow of a doubt, it absolutely smacks of Gregson all the way through. But it is an extremely demanding piece, demanding for the players, but also demanding for the audience. And I honestly think that's what the Albert Hall audience want. They deserve a piece that demonstrates a progressive attitude, and I believe that's what that choice does.
Well, it was written initially, I think, for the British Open Championships over a decade ago now, but it wasn't taken up there. It is a long piece. It's about 18 and a half, 19 minutes, and it may go even further with some bands if they milk it. But it's worth it, isn't it? Because when it is played well, it's got such substance about it, and it will do its job. So on the one hand, musically it's very satisfying, and for adjudicators and for the audience, they can soon pick out which bands can play it and which band can't.
Yeah, absolutely. A wonderful 80th birthday present for Eddie at the same time, actually, to have that piece, because I know how, as I said, I know how well he thinks of that piece, and he does feel that it's one of his finest works, if not his finest work. So yeah, a wonderful 80th birthday present for him. I think that's really something to look forward to.
Well, looking forward, but looking back also with Eddie Gregson, because the fourth section test piece is Partita from 1971. And you mentioned Redbridge in London. It was written for the Redbridge Youth Band, as it was there. I think it was a chap Clark who was conducting them. Again, but the rigour of the piece, because it comes from thematic material from Desiree, isn't it? And that moves all the way through the work there. But again, for fourth section, to play a work which has got that type of academic rigour to it, which needs to understand it. It's not all froth and bubbles and taps on the heads and jumping through hoops. There's serious music to be made with it.
There is. It still takes some playing, doesn't it? And it's also remarkable how well those early pieces of Edward Gregson still stand up. I mean, you've got Partita, Intrada, Essay, the Plantagenets, all those pieces that came quite early in Eddie's creative career. They're still all great pieces. I think Partita, it's lovely that we've got those test pieces or the finals bookended by those two Eddie Gregson pieces, one from his very early years, one much more recent, and yet they're still both recognisably by the same composer. I think the bands in the fourth section will get a lot out of that piece.
Well, the sandwich in between comes from Arthur Bliss, or Sir Arthur Bliss, as some of them went after he was knighted. The first section piece, a piece I think I'm quite sure you've played and I've played, Checkmate.
Yes.
The ballet music. The only disappointment I have to say is really that even though it says there's 4 dances from Checkmate, only 3 of them are being used, and they really could have, without pushing the boat out, put the fourth one, the Mazurka, the Red Knights Mazurka, and added that one. That's a bit of a disappointment because it actually balances in terms of style the little suite that was put together. It's not the greatest arrangement, and sacrosanct by saying it by his Eric Ball. It's really done on pitch rather than colour. If I say Howard Snell had done it, I think it would have been a very different beast then. But it's still a really good test, and I think it'll be popular with the bands.
I think it will be popular. I totally agree with what you've just said. It's a shame that it's been knocked down to 3 movements. I kind of understand why, but musically it's a shame. I think the suite loses a little bit of its structure, a little bit of its strength by doing that. I also agree with you about the arrangement. I mean, Eric Ball might be sacrosanct, but to be fair, not all of his arrangements are A1. And I think if that piece was rearranged, as you say, in the hands of somebody like Howard Snell or several other arrangers, we could really have a very special arrangement. But I think it's a good choice overall. I think the bands will love playing it. We'll still enjoy listening to it, Ewan, won't we? It's a piece that's been with us for so many years, as you say. We played it. Gosh, I think I probably first played it in the mid-1980s, something like that. So we go back a long way with that music. In comparison, of course, to the other 2 Bliss arrangements, which are much newer.
They are 2 new ones. They are 2 new ones there. I have to say, the one thing I would say about Checkmate, of course, he comes to the chess is very popular at the moment. I think there's a program on BBC with Sue Perkins.
Yeah.
There's a film called Queen's Gambit or whatever. Chess is the new in-game to play. So, and I think it'll be very popular in that respect. I think the other part of it as well, when it comes to the actual checkmate, I think the Black Queen kills him by stabbing him 20 times just to make sure that he's dead at the end of it. You ain't going to get back up after that one. It's a great dramatic finish, and it is. So I think the bands will do that. Your point is well made with the suite from Adam Zero.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say early Bliss. It's Bliss from the 1940s.
Yeah.
Interesting. I looked into the work. He had written a piece called "Miracle in the Gaubles."
Yes, yeah.
Which had been put on at Sadler's Wells and was a great hit. And there's actually a suite of music in that from that, which would be really interesting to see whether or not that would be could be done for brass band as well. But this one, Adam Zero, came after that. It was written. The conductor was Constant Lambert, and Constant Lambert fell ill, and then the piece it had a pause and never really came back. Bliss himself thought it was his most exciting and best ballet score, but the actual ballet itself didn't become a great success and was lost almost for 50 years until it came back. Robert Charles has done a great job in putting it together, not in chronological order, because in that way it doesn't really fit, but he's actually done it in such a way that the suite itself makes sense and you get the essence of the ballet.
Yeah. Well, of course, all of this is going to be good sales material for Black Dyke's recent album of Bliss's music, because all these pieces are on there. There's some really engaging music in Adam Zero, and I think to be fair to Robert Childs, you couldn't do it chronologically. He's had to create something that's cohesive as a suite that works as a much shorter piece of music, and I think he's actually done that very well. I mean, he's taken the main thematic material, he's restructured it, and turned it into something that works. I remember when we first heard this piece a while back, I think we were sitting together at time and thought, actually, this could make a good second section test piece.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I think it will make a good second section test piece. Most of the bands won't have heard the original ballet, so the music is going to be quite new to them. But I actually think they will find a lot of music in it to bring out. And there were some really good themes in it, actually.
Well, that's Bliss from the 1940s. The third section test piece, the Royal Palace, music from the Royal Palaces, is Bliss later in his life from the 1960s, almost coming towards the last decade or so of his life.
Yeah.
And this is Bliss as the master of the establishment, whereas earlier he was a bit of an enfant terrible, only when he did the Colour Symphony and that type of thing.
Yeah.
This was music from a 1966 television series presented by Kenneth Clarke, not the Tory MP, but actually the father of a Tory MP, the very colourful Alan Clarke.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
not the footballer from Leeds United from about the early 1970s either.
Alan Clarke, famed for his diaries, I think. Ewan, if I remember rightly.
Now, if you want colour, read those diaries, because I have to say they are very, very colourful. X-rated in places, I have to say, but they were really good. So this is late Bliss, and there are echoes really of early Bliss with Kenilworth, etc., but it's music of pomp and majesty and a little bit of trying to retain the mystery of the royal family, although it goes back for its inspiration to Queen Victoria, etc. So it's quite traditional in its way, but there is something about it that is readily identifiable as Bliss at his best.
Yeah, I think Bliss almost went full circle. It's quite interesting that, as you say, to look at Bliss now and think that he was branded as progressive, as an enfant terrible, almost a little bit like Gilbert Vinter in a way, if you wanted a brass band comparison. And in fact, his Colour Symphony, maybe you could actually compare with Spectrum in that respect. But he definitely, I think, as he got older, he softened, he mellowed, as many composers do. This music was written for very specific occasions, as you say, a television series when he'd become Master of the Queen's Music. So it was written for a specific purpose, and it will be even less known to bands than Adam Zero, because this was new to me, quite honestly, when I heard it on the Black Dyke disc only 2 or 3 months ago now. But yeah, there's a lot of majestic music in there to be brought out. Very different to Adam Zero, but again, I think it's a very different piece musically to all of the other test pieces that have been chosen for the finals.
Another excellent arrangement as well. So that's the music that's going to be featured at the national finals later on this year. We've got to give a plug because it's all can be heard on this great release by the Black Dyke Band, conducted by John Wilson, and it's well worth listening to. It won't make you play like Black Dyke under John Wilson, but it'll give you a great idea because he brings so much character out of each of the pieces. Well, Chris, we had a review program, so it's the time to find out what we're going to be recommending, etc. And first up is our CD choices and the ones that have been recently released. I know one that really, or two of them really, that you've taken a fancy to. The first one's been out a little while, which is Peter Moore's Shift with Tredegar Band. We did preview this a little bit on the previous podcast. It has now really reached out. It's had reviews in the Gramophone, it's had reviews in the British Music Society and others. It's really made an impression, and deservedly so. It's a player at the very top of his form.
It's sublime playing, Ewan. I mean, that's the only word I can use. It's sublime playing. The Simon Dobson Concerto is magnificent. Technically, what a tour de force that piece is. But the ease with which Peter Moore dispatches it is just quite incredible. But I have to say, the piece that I have listened to over and over again is him playing the Gordon Langford Rhapsody for trombone. I think I probably mentioned something about this when we were talking last time. I grew up with that piece. I've listened to Don Lusher playing it. I've listened to so many other trombonists playing it. I don't think I've ever heard it played as well as Peter Moore plays it. The relaxed, languid sense of style, it's just absolutely wonderful. And there were some little miniatures on the disc as well, sort of tributes to Tommy Dorsey, all of which of course are wonderfully played. But for me it's the Langford and Simon Dobson's Shift that stand out.
It is. He is a remarkable player, and if you've got the opportunity, please get it, because it is, as we say, a player at the very top of his form. That's on the Chandos label, and it's great to see Chandos coming back into recording with brass bands.
Absolutely.
Naxos also are doing that, and it's great to see, as we say, they did it with the Bliss recording, and now they've done it with this one, David Charles Virtuoso. And the highest compliment I can pay this is that if Willy Wonka made lollipops for brass bands, this would be it, because they are, in many ways, lollipop performances of pieces, but certainly not lollipop performances, because he plays with such character and style, the classiness of what he does. It lifts what could possibly, and possibly unfair to say, mundane source material and lifts it to a completely and utterly different level. Everything has got clarity about it. Everything has got a sense of musicality about it. Again, another remarkable player on the very top of his form.
Yeah. I think what defines what you've just said is the fact that David Charles isn't simply a virtuoso of the euphonium. He's just a wonderful all-round musician. And I was lucky enough to have a chat with Dave about this piece last week, and he was saying that it's a very different disc to a lot of the other discs that he's put out previously, where he's recorded some of the big concertos, pieces by Alan Hodinott and Carl Jenkins, and a lot of the big pieces that have been written for him. They are miniatures, as you say, but actually they're all pieces that have got a personal significance for Dave in some shape or form. So he was saying that for him, it's actually a very personal CD, perhaps the most personal CD of any disc that he's released so far. It is really, really special, and it's actually one of those discs that you can sit down, you don't have to listen to it all in one go, you can actually just dip into it, and it is wonderful all the way through.
I have to say, you talked about the personal thing, there's a track on the Elfried, which his dad used to play as a showcase solo. It comes to the end of it, he goes up to a lip trill, and you think he's reached the very top of his range, and then he goes up even further and comes back down. That takes him to it. His dad could do it brilliant, and he does it also. So that's a fantastic one. That, as I say, is on the Naxos label. It's out now. I think it was only just released about a week or so ago.
Yeah,
Both
week.
That and the Peter Moore are already making their mark on the classical music chart, so please get out and actually get them. One that's been out a little bit longer, I'm going to give another plug to, is this one, Storm by Hauts de France. It's on the Doyen label. The band that were recently crowned the French national champions, I think, for the 5th consecutive time under Luc Vertommen. A very fine band, as we've heard, at the European Brass Band Championships, where I think they won the set work in Palanga, and then came last, I think, on the own choice. They
did.
A real up and down weekend that
yeah.
weekend. But they're a wonderful band, and this is really a CD. The more you listen to it, you realise just how good they are. Interestingly, they got two pieces that caught my fancy. Leonard Bernstein's suite from his Mass, and Maria de Buenos Aires, a suite by Astor Piazzolla, both arranged by Luc Vertommen. And we talked about earlier about arrangements, say, for instance, of Checkmate. Luc Vertommen is a really fine arranger for brass bands.
He is a fine arranger, and he's an interesting musician. One of the things I love about Luc and the work that he does with Hauts de France is the fact that they're adventurous. They're prepared to go into unusual territory. Their own choice pieces for the Europeans were always interesting, aren't they? I mean, we've had we've had one or two quite offbeat sort of pieces, off the wall pieces, but they're willing to take chances with things like that, and I love that. I love the fact that there's a spirit of adventure. They're willing to go out, they're willing to take chances with music, they're willing to take chances with certain composers. And hats off to that. I think that's a great spirit, and I think Luc Vertommen is probably in many ways one of the most progressive arrangers and conductors that I know that's around at the moment, really.
Two then to finish off with. One of them has just come out. I haven't had a physical copy yet, but I've been listening to it on the WobPlay recording platform. Antiphonies by the Black Dyke Band, conducted by Professor Nicholas Child. The title track, of course, is the Oliver Westby piece, which they used at the European Championships, I think in Malmo, if I was rightly. But it's also a great little piece by Philip Wilby called Beethoven, which is a little bit very witty. I remember nearly as witty as the introduction that Philip Wilby gave when he was premiered at the RNCM, if you remember that.
Yeah,
Talking about the body and the arms and the legs.
Yeah,
I tell you what, they should book him at the Wheel Tappers and Shunters Club, I think, because he's a brilliant comic, he is. Also, there's Judith Bingham's lyrical euphonium concerto Venice. Now, this is played by Daniel Thomas, and it was recorded at the time when he was the solo euphonium player with the band. And it's great that they've included it, because Judith Bingham's work, it really is a very different take on the euphonium concerto.
Yeah, it is. And it's wonderful to hear Judith Bingham writing for brass band again. It's been quite some time, hasn't it? When you look back to the earlier pieces that she wrote, there's been a long, long gap. But I think Daniel Thomas commissioned this piece from her himself. And, well done, Dan, for that enterprise, because it's a very special, ethereal piece, as you say, quite different to something like Prague, which is much more visceral. And don't get me wrong, Venice has got its dark moments as well, but it is a fabulous piece, and it's great to hear it recorded. We heard it premiered at the Festival of Brass. I think that was last year, Ewan, wasn't it? Actually, when Dan premiered it there. But great to hear a new piece by Judith.
Yeah, really good. I'm going to give a couple of little shout-outs as well. One that's just come through the post from me, Stepping Out by the Eland Silver Band. The reason for that is that they're a great organisation. We talked about sustainability in banding for the future. Here's a band that really's got that at its heart. It features performances by its senior band, its youth band, its training band, and its community band. And it's also got a title track which was written by the great Roy Newsom. So that's one. Roy Newsom, I think he conducted the band in the late 1950s. So that's where he really took his first steps in banding. So if you see that one, make sure you have to buy it. So that's my little recommendation there. Contest-wise, I went recently to the National Youth Brass Band Championships up in Hull. I have to say, Chris, we talked about the regional championships and whether or not the progress that has been made there. Brass Bands England has made exceptional progress with this event. It's a combination of competitive and non-competitive playing. The non-competitive playing for me is the absolute joy, where it has a Bess and Prodige section where anybody can come along and play. And it's absolute fun, it's inclusive, it's diverse, and it really does show that the brass band movement can be built on wide-ranging foundations. Following on from that is the Yamaha Performance section, which was won by the Shepherd Group youth band. Again, another organisation which is doing amazing work in the way in which it's making sure that it's got sustainability in its brass banding. And then the top section, which had real competitive part, was won by Youth Brass 2000. Yeah. Brass Bands England have got this one right, haven't they?
They have, and as you say, they've done really, truly innovative things with the contest. The spirit about it, I think the non-competitive element of it, as you say, is an absolute joy. It's fabulous, and there was a great atmosphere at that event all weekend. And long may it last. I think Brass Bands England, hats off to them. I think they're doing a terrific job in progressing that side of banding, and wow, we need it. So it's great work from them, definitely.
Well, that's that one. The other contest that I'm looking forward to is hopefully on this weekend, which is the Cons Test, which takes place at the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. It's run by Mike Foley Hall. It will see, and I'm just looking at it, it starts at 10 o'clock. 18 bands taking part. There are some reprises, of course, of the regional test pieces, but some very interesting choices from the bands. Somebody's playing In Memoriam RK, for instance. Another one's playing Blitz. We've got the Raid, Chorale and Toccata, Stephen Buller, the Plantagenets, talking about early Edward Gregson. So this is, again, somebody who's taken a competition, has made his mark with it, and he's made his mark because it's open, it's transparent, the bands know exactly what's going on, there's open adjudication, and everybody leaves for home happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know one of the bands was playing In Memoriam RK. What a fantastic choice! I mean, hats off to them for that. I mean, that is terrific to hear that piece played on a contest platform. But again, as you say, it's that contest is about a sense of fun. It's about a sense of occasion, and it's really taking contesting in a different direction. And I love that. I love the innovative approach to it.
Right then, concerts. I went to, and we put up some reviews on the site, a great concert in London at Regent Hall, Peter Graham, with the Coldstream Guards Band, and featured Stephen Mead, all in Peter Graham's transcriptions of his brass band works, really, for wind band. It was a really lovely concert, wonderfully played by the band and directed by Andrew Porter, who not only now conducts the Coldstream Brass Band, but he's also done some great work with the Morecambe Band in the past in the brass banding world. So that was one for me, and I really enjoyed that. Reviews are up on the site. My recommendation for a concert to go to is the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain. Their Easter course takes place at Pangbourne College in Berkshire from the 12th to the 19th of April under Colonel David Barringer. Again, another military man who's got a real good background within the banding world. So this is going to be plenty to look forward to there. They've got an open day on Friday the 18th and an alumni reunion. And the course concert is at Tidworth Garrison Theatre, Saturday the 19th of April, with a guest soloist, another fantastic player, Isabel Dawes. And they're also doing a joint concert with the British Brass Band on the 26th of April. So that's my recommendation for the concert. What's yours, Chris?
Well, I'm going to take you away from brass bands, Ewan. I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, and people are going to have to be quick on this because it's on the evening of the 10th of April, which is tomorrow night. We're recording this on the 9th of April. City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, Symphony Hall, Toru Takemitsu's Requiem, and Mahler 9. Now, the conductor of the CBSO, Kazuki Yamada, is really making big waves, relatively new at the orchestra as their new principal conductor. Mahler 9 is always a special experience, but interesting here because the Takemitsu piece, of course, Takemitsu did write for brass. There was a piece called Garden Rain that we talked about on the Grimethorpe special disc, which was originally written for symphonic brass, which was rescored for brass band. So there is a brass piece by Takemitsu. But a really interesting program. The Takemitsu piece is quite short, only about 8 or 9 minutes long. And then we have 90 minutes of Mahler 9. How wonderful is that? And I have to say, with a few brass band players in the brass section, Ewan, Caitlin Wilde, who's recently joined the CBSO on second trumpet, and who's grown up in the Midlands, a banding family, of course. So Caitlin's new in the orchestra. So great to see some players with a brass band heritage that will be involved in that concert tomorrow night.
Fantastic. 90 minutes, blimey. That's a test.
90 minutes, absolutely.
Fancy you're in 19 performances of that at the Albert Hall. I'll be doing it.
Makes Symphony 2 movement sound like a lollipop, Ewan, doesn't it?
It does. There we go. Books now, and I think it's easy that we try this one. Two of them. One of them, which I know has really interested you. It's been out for a little while. It is called Moreland's Symphonies by Paul Conway. It's a chronology, really, of the works of Arthur Butterworth. Now, Arthur Butterworth is a composer who has a strong connection, of course, with the bandy movement. Wasn't really taken into his heart, although he does so much great stuff with the National Youth Brass Band, etc. And great pieces such as Odin and Caliban that he wrote there. But a very, very interesting, complex man. And Paul Conway's book doesn't shy away from that. There's interviews in it that he actually gave to the Banding Press, where he's very forthcoming with his views and opinions about brass bands. I think it was about Bess's the Barn Band at the time. But a very interesting composer, somebody that you knew quite well.
Yes, I mean, I got to know Arthur very well in the later years of his life, and in fact, before he passed away, I knew that Paul Conway, who's a very well-respected writer on British music, was putting together this book. I think what's lovely about it is that it takes us into territory that a lot of people won't be familiar with. I mean, sadly, so much of Arthur's orchestral music and music other than his brass band music, well, you could actually say the same for his brass band music. A lot of it has sadly fallen into neglect. So a lot of the pieces that Paul's talking about are relatively little known. He was a complex man, although I have to say he was also a great gentleman. He was a wonderful raconteur. I can remember him telling me wonderful stories about when he went to Vaughan Williams for lessons, and in fact I can remember him telling me quite clearly. He even described the weather on the afternoon that he first went to Vaughan Williams' house to meet with him. And he was a wonderful, wonderful man to talk to in that respect. But he didn't mince his words, and there was a famous article that he published, I think it was in the British Bandsman, called Brass Band's A Cloth Cap Joke. Do you remember that, Ewan?
Yes, yeah. I think that's in the book, yeah.
It caused furore at the time. I mean, he was absolutely... Well, he was almost ostracised from the brass band movement for it, really. But he spoke up, he said what he thought, and that was Arthur, straight down the middle, a fine composer, and this is a really interesting book. I think Paul Conway has put years of work into it. It's interesting to read, it's not difficult to read, and highly recommended.
Yeah, it's on the Literature Press, it is, so we'll put the details on after that. Other one, which I'm going to give a little plug to, for the simple reason, it's got a quote on the back, says, provides an absorbing narrative mix of cold insight and warm emotion to examine the beating heart of the British brass band movement. It's called Front Row Seat by Peter Hardy, and it comes from a very left-wing perspective. It's part fiction, part fact, but it's a really interesting, it's very witty and clever, but the analysis that he gives about where brass banding currently stands in the great cultural life of the UK is very interesting to come from. Yes, it does come from possibly more of my perspective, but he still gives very cogent arguments about how brass bandings could have developed and what missed opportunities, etc., and where we currently stand. So if you've got that one, Chris, I'll drop it in your Christmas box for you.
Please
that
do.
One.
But make sure it's wrapped up, Ewan, please.
It'll have to. That one. It doesn't go down well in Leamington Spa, I don't think, from that one there. What may go down well in Leamington Spa, then, is our two LP choices to round things off. The first one, I think, I'm quite sure you wouldn't mind seeing coming through in a Christmas stocking, as long as your Christmas stocking is LP-shaped. It's Cataclysm. Edward Gregson, London Collegiate Brass. And the reason I picked that, as we say, we've talked about Edward Gregson and his work, his 80th anniversary, etc., and the work that's going to be used at the national finals. Wouldn't it have been great if they had picked Cataclysm by Paul Patterson for the national finals? This is a bit of a groundbreaking LP, and if people have the opportunity to try and find one in a charity shop or online, please get it. It makes for very, very interesting listening.
I am so envious that you've got that disc, Ewan. How long have you had that?
I don't know. I don't really know. I think I may have picked it up somewhere for about 30p in a Blind Avon thrift shop or whatever. But it's a great LP. It's got French horns on it, trumpets on it. It's actually got the interpretations of Triumphant Rhapsody by Gilbert Winter with French horns and trumpets is amazing. But there's also works by Roberto Gerhard and Adrian Kraft. Now, again, interesting composers, and possibly we missed the opportunity of using those more for the brass band movement.
Yeah, I mean, Cataclysm's I mean, Paul Patterson's music has changed a lot in more recent years, but Cataclysm was one of those early aleatoric pieces that he wrote when he was very influenced by the new Polish school of people like Penderecki and Lutosławski. Roberto Gerhard is an interesting character, Catalan by birth, a very hard-edged serialist, I mean, really seriously gritty music. But he spent most of his life in Cambridge, funnily enough. Although he was born in Spain, he spent much of his life working at Cambridge University. And Adrian Kraft, a sort of fringe figure of English light music, I think it's probably fair to say. But what a range on that disc! I mean, it's fantastic. And as you say, I think James Stobart is still around, Ewan, actually.
He is, yes. I got a feeling he's still doing some stuff there. So it really is a great LP. I know Tim Newton, who is the doyen of LP collectors, etc. He recommended that one, so that's one to look out for. And I know one that he's also recommended to me is of a very different vintage. I'm going to just show it. It'll come up on the screen for people to say. The National Champions present, and it's the National Champions from 1963, the great, or this it says, the famous CWS Manchester Band, conducted by the musical martinet himself, the great Alex Mortimer. And the reason it's on the Fontana label, it's a remarkable recording. And the reason why I picked this one, talking again about the national finals, it's got a performance of the Force of Destiny on there. Because famously, CWS Manchester won that title with an iconic performance of the Force of Destiny. Now, it's very odd when we listen to it now in retrospect, because it's on high-pitched instruments, etc. The use of rubato as well as vibrato is very different today as it was there. But there is no mistaking the absolute quality and the precision of this band. And even more than that, there's a wonderful performance of Introduction and Allegro Spiritoso played by the great, and I do mean the great, Lyndon Baglin. And he is still with us. And I tell you what, it is worth seeking that out just for that performance. So if you're in a charity shop, Chris, I don't know how many of them you have up with you there. If we can find the famous CWS Manchester Band conducted by Alex Mortimer, get that one. That's an absolutely peach, a little gem of something which you can get there. So, Chris, that's it for our episode for today. And many thanks again for joining me.
Pleasure.
I have to say, it's going to be, we're going to have further episodes coming out, and my thanks go to Russell Prue from Anton Tiger for producing this. And please, when you do actually see it, please subscribe. And there's a little bell on when you actually go on to the channel, which means that you get notification of when our next program is coming up. And we will be doing some more, because we'll be previewing the European Brass Band Championships with myself and Chris will be enjoying to go into, and also hopefully some other interviews with leading personalities. So, Chris, many thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Ewan.
I'm going to wish you good night from here in Blaenavon, and I look forward to catching up with you in the near future. Many thanks.